So I'm here to introduce Sarah Stodola and Mindy Todd. Based in Brooklyn, New York, Sarah Stodola has written for the New York Times, the New York Magazine, the Daily Beast, the BBC, CNN, Slice, and many others. She is the founder of Flung Magazine, a publication dedicated to critical thinking about travel absent in the media. Her most recent book, The Last Resort, a chronicle of paradise, profit, and peril at the beach, has been described as a sharp and exhaustive examination of the history and pitfalls of luxury beach resorts all over the world, a thorough and appropriately alarming analysis of how we made paradise and how it might be saved. Sarah is in conversation with Mindy Todd. Mindy is the host and producer of the weekday program The Point on the Cape and Islands NPR station WCAI. And she has been the managing director of editorials since 2012. Mindy brings nearly 40 years of experience in radio and television to WCAI. So let's welcome Mindy and Sarah.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for being here. So Sarah,
Hold on. Okay, it's working.
First thing is like, I'm going to write about luxury beach resorts around the world. That sounds like a really nice assignment.
It wasn't the worst assignment I've ever had. I would note that it wasn't only luxury beach resorts.
That's true.
I went down market quite a lot also.
One of the things I found really interesting in the book, too, was the history, and you get into, and obviously we don't have time to talk about all the history, but just to kind of remind people, the first seaside resorts were built for like wellness, the wellness industry. So you went to get better or breathe that fresh air.
Yes, that's exactly right. The first ones were in England in the 18th century, and they emerged as kind of an alternative to the inland health resorts that already existed, but that trend kind of shifted out to the shores in the 18th century, and it was, they weren't meant to be necessarily an enjoyable place to go. They were kind of aesthetic experiences. You followed a very serious regimen of improving your health or convalescing from an illness, and some of the strange, some of the things that doctors would prescribe, like involved mixing seawater into your wine with dinner, washing your eyes out with it. It was a lot of maybe not so enjoyable interactions with the ocean. Yeah.
I also found the history of Monte Carlo to be really interesting because we think of Monte Carlo as like this beautiful, exotic place where all the rich people hang out. And in 1852, in the Monte Carlo guidebook, it was said to be sad abandonment and decay. So this was not a pretty place. And Princess Caroline had this great idea in 1855 to legalize gambling. She was brilliant.
Yes, it was kind of Monaco's last-ditch effort to save itself. It's commonly believed that if they hadn't opened the casino and at the time a spa and health resort there, that's not there anymore. But if they hadn't done that today it would be part of France. So this was really the thing that saved it and allowed it to become independent. And it was also kind of represented a turning point for beach resorts and beach tourism because it was the first time that the beach became a destination for decadence and fun and indulgence. So before that, it remained a place of propriety, a place to work seriously on your health and wellness, and Monte Carlo was really the turning point for that.
And then today, it's the beach resort without a beach.
That's right. Well, they have the original,
it's a very small beach.
Yes, the original beach that had the kind of health spa built in the 1800s is now a marina for mega yachts. There's no beach there, but they have created at the other end of Monaco an artificial beach. They've hauled in sand, and they do have a beach. It's not original.
So what was your visit there like? Was it what you expected?
To Monte Carlo.
Yeah.
I think it largely was. I don't think I went in anticipating that it was going to be a place where the beach was front and center anymore, and it certainly isn't. It's the ostentation and the wealth is front and center when you go there now. Yeah.
The other thing interesting was Jersey Shore in the late 1800s had the reputation of the American Monte Carlo. That's kind of hard to picture, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really interesting that because the place in particular that got said about is Long Branch, which is really close to New York City. If any of you are from there, familiar with there, and it's kind of a commuter town now. There's no resort left there anymore. But at the time, for probably a couple decades, it was the most popular beach resort in the country, and the American Monte Carlo. Yep.
Yeah, and you write in the book, by the turn of the century, the northeastern edge of the U.S. from New Jersey to Maine had been remade as summer refuge from the cities. That's when we had all those big grand hotels all over the place, which are mostly gone now. Yeah.
There were hundreds of them, and there was this great book that the name is escaping me now. That documented all of the large resorts that one time lined all of New England, and it was in the hundreds of major resorts, and there are 10 of those left of the hundreds today. So yeah.
And I think, especially those of us who have the winters here, and we always want to get away to that beach destination, right? You want to get to the beach, and we think of tropical beaches. And tell us about your visit to the Royal Hawaiian. Hawaii, $18 billion tourism industry, but it's maybe not what we would think.
Right. The beach at Waikiki, which is where the Royal Hawaiian is. The Royal Hawaiian was opened in the 1920s. It was one of the first kind of major hotel resorts that went up in Hawaii. And almost as soon as it went up, and even maybe before it went up, people were kind of engineering that shoreline and that beach for tourism purposes. And there's this New York Times article I found from, 1928 or something, that is already complaining about how the construction there and the overdevelopment there has caused the sand to wash away and ruined the shoreline. And so this has been something that was going on from the very start in Waikiki, actually, as a kind of tourism hub, and continues to this day. I was very surprised the first time I went there, because Waikiki has such a large place in the imagination, and arriving there and actually seeing that a lot of that stretch, that bay of Waikiki doesn't have sand anymore, and there are sandbags piled up to keep the shore in place, and in some places there's just seawalls and no beach. That part was very surprising to me.
Yeah, and this way again, these hotels you talk about, and this isn't the only one. They sit on on that front line of the battle against sea level rise. Talk a little bit about. You mentioned engineering the beaches, and we see this obviously in many places. We have the sea walls, the jetties, the breakwaters. You can't beat Mother Nature.
You can't, no. You can contend with her more intelligently in some ways, but seawalls, which have been used so extensively, are almost guaranteed to cause they're usually put up to help hold what beach or what building has been built on the beach in place, and they almost always cause what is left of that beach to wash away. It's seawalls almost never work. Some of the other, they're getting better at figuring out things that can work, but long term, it is an overall losing battle. Yeah.
And then we see a lot of them also doing the beach nourishment projects where they bring the sand in. And again, that's temporary. It's very expensive. What I think a lot of people don't realize is you can't just take any old sand and put it on a beach. It has to match the sand that's there. And so that's another one that can get very expensive long-term. And again, there is no long-term solutions against battling against erosion.
Right. And it's interesting, actually, the northeastern coast of the U.S. is actually in a fairly good position in that sense because there is just kind of almost limitless amounts of sand offshore that can be dredged for beach replenishment. And so it's less expensive in this part of the world and also a more viable solution. There's other places like Waikiki, for instance, like Miami Beach, that have no sand offshore to pull in. So they need new solutions now because that's just simply not an option anymore. And one of the reasons is that their sand tends to be made out of coral reefs that have broken down over centuries. And so for that process to build sand back up takes a very, very long time.
Yeah, and that's one of the areas that's actually banned suntan lotions that can impact the reefs. And I hadn't thought about that, but it makes a lot of sense when you've got that many people in the waters and what that does to the reef.
Yeah, and the reefs are so important, not only as the source of sand, but for, they kind of serve as a first line of protection against storms. Places that have a strong coral reef, the storm waters can kind of get broken a bit before they hit shore. They're so important, obviously, for the ecosystem, for a thriving ecosystem. There's just kind of endless ways that make it important for a coral reef to remain healthy. Unfortunately, coral reefs are also very delicate, and it doesn't take a lot of change in environment to really impact them, which is what we're dealing with now.
Yeah. Tell us about the Naviti Resort in Fiji. I think we always think of Fiji as this amazing tropical place that maybe we'd like to go visit. Tell us a little bit about Naviti. Yeah,
so the Naviti Resort was, I met this guy who had been studying as for his PhD and then in his academic life, had been studying this one village and the impact of the resort that opened next to it for years. And it's, Fiji's really interesting because they have really, really strong land rights for the indigenous people there. So unlike a lot of places that would just kind of get the locals off the land and they would not be able to benefit from beach tourism coming in, this village called Vatualailai actually owns the land that it's on and rents it to a resort. And this started in the 70s. And before the resort came in, they lived a very kind of self-sufficient existence. There was a sense of like collective good and prosperity in the village. And then when the resort opened, it all of a sudden changed the culture of that village completely. It wiped away a lot of the things that they had used to survive, in nature. They had fished quite a lot as for food, and within 20 years or so, most of the villagers didn't even know how to fish anymore. It was, that kind of thing. But then there's the flip side of it. So they did lose their kind of culture and heritage. And then on the flip side of that, though, they also gained kind of, important modern amenities that we would consider essential, like, they have access to healthcare now, they have access to education now. And so it's this very double-edged sword of when a resort comes in, kind of what it destroys, and then also if it's done in a way that can actually benefit the local community, what it actually does for that community.
Some good lessons learned there, though. They came in, they took out the natural trees and put in palm trees, right, which were not native to that area. And some of the changes that manufactured environment had negative consequences, as you're mentioning, like the turtles that used to nest there no longer nest there. So we saw this, as you say, over a couple of decades. We could see the impacts of what that, which is lessons learned for, hopefully, for other beach resorts going forward.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
One of the craziest things that I learned while researching this book was that the coconut palm tree is actually only native to 2 places in the world. One, I think, in Malaysia, and I think the other one is in India. And somehow it became this kind of global symbol of beach paradise. And it was a terrible choice because it doesn't do any of the things that you need a tree, at the shorefront to do. It has really shallow root systems, so it doesn't really help with erosion. It requires a ton of water, which isn't that helpful. And it also doesn't provide very much shade, which, especially as the world's getting warmer and warmer, shade is an important commodity, and palm trees don't really provide it. So I think there is a growing awareness of that and starting to be a trend toward moving away from palms.
The saddest chapter in the book for me was on Tulum. Has anybody been here to Tulum, been to Tulum? Okay. I was there before, this was 1991, and we actually were staying on Cozumel, and we came over, rented a car in Playa del Carmen, which was this little beat-up old VW that had alarme, it had an alarm system. I doubt very much. And we were going to go to Coba to see the pyramids in Coba, which was fabulous, and not a lot of people knew about it or were there back then. But on the way, we stopped in Tulum to see the pyramids there, which are right on the coast. There were no restaurants. It was nothing. There was nothing on that stretch from Playa del Carmen to Tulum. And now, overdeveloped.
Now, yes. Tulum is just almost the best example there is of a place that kind of advertises one thing and in reality is the other thing. It's been built kind of in such an irresponsible manner, and because it's not hooked up to any sewer system, it's not hooked up to electric system, so everything runs on diesel generators, and all the waste just gets dumped into the land, and the land under there is this huge network of underground rivers that stretches over the whole entire Yucatan peninsula, and as all of this waste is seeping into it, it's polluting the entire peninsula's water source, not just the immediate areas. So it's really the opposite of an eco resort when you get down to it. Yeah.
So sad. Talk a little about the impact that COVID has had on beach resorts.
I think we're still finding out what the permanent changes will be. I think that this isn't in the book, but because I hadn't thought of it then. But one of the things is I don't think that daily housekeeping is coming back. I think they got rid of it during COVID, and I think it's now a cost-saving measure that they've decided that they can stick with. But there's some other things, like we kind of thought the buffet was done. I think that buffets are coming back, actually. I think one of the biggest kind of foundational things that's going to change, and that has changed about beach resorts in this regard, though, is that the remote work phenomenon is sticking around. It's that seems to be becoming permanent, and what that means is that people can travel differently. They can, especially to a kind of beach resort vacation, they can stay for longer. They can do work while they're there, and so we're seeing resorts really start to cater to this kind of. We'll see which buzzword holds, but there's workcation, there's bleisure, like business and leisure. We'll see what sticks, but yeah.
Leisure, I hadn't heard that one. But from an environmental standpoint, did we see any changes? Because when we all stopped flying and driving, and globally we saw, some impact that we would never think could happen that fast, right?
We did. I unfortunately don't know how much of that is going to be permanent. I think what it has done is caused some places that were really overrun and had maybe suffered from overdevelopment, to really step back and see how much they wanted to continue focusing on beach tourism. I think Barbados, I spent time in for the book, is one example of that has an economy that's almost completely reliant on beach tourism. And I think while, it was shut down, the government was able to kind of take a beat and consider what their economy should look like going forward. And they've made some decisions to kind of diversify away from, of course they're going to keep beach tourism. It's very integrated into the society and the culture there, but they're really moving out into, alternative energy and doing, some other things now. And I think that's one kind of permanent repercussion, is that some places are choosing not to be quite as all in on tourism as maybe they were before the pandemic.
Talk a little bit about that. You had the cycle of evolution for tourist areas. Was the exploration stage, development stage, consolidation stage, stagnation stage, and then decline.
I think we missed one.
Okay.
It's exploration, involvement, development, consolidation,
decline.
Stagnation.
No, okay, stagnation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we got there.
But we see a lot of these resorts go through that cycle.
Yes. It holds pretty well. It's, the exploration stage kind of happens, and this was not my life cycle. This was an academic named Butler who came up with this in somewhere around 1980, of this life cycle of tourism destinations. And the exploration stage, it kind of starts out where the few kind of intrepid travelers just discover a place that has no services for tourism. It's, a great example of when that happens in beach tourism is surfing, because surfers are willing to go anywhere for a good wave. So if they discover a wave, whether there's any kind of accommodation there or any kind of services there, they'll go. And so that happens. And then from there, a kind of rudimentary tourism industry emerges, but it's run completely by the locals. And this part that's really interesting to me is that it involves the visitors kind of assimilating to the local culture and not vice versa. But then what happens in the development stage is that starts to change, and bigger companies start to come in, outsiders start to come in, and locals start to lose a bit of control over the industry, and that dynamic switches, where instead of the tourists coming and living the life of the local community caters to the culture of the tourists. And then consolidation, which is like fewer and fewer bigger companies having more of the control. This is the stage where people start lamenting how much better the place used to be. Mm-hmm. And the locals and the tourists start to become a little disillusioned with the place. It's not quite as much of a quote unquote paradise as it once was. And then after that happens, you're dealing with overdevelopment, and you have stagnation, and then decline from there. And it's a cycle that holds pretty well for any. I would say I think Nantucket is a little different, but places that have developed the beach tourism in a way that there's like a number of big resorts and a number of the big management companies. There's Marriott's and Hilton's and all of that. This cycle holds pretty well, and I think Acapulco is a great example of that. That I cover pretty extensively in the book, which is a place that was once, kind of the height of glamour and aspirational beach travel. And now probably none of us know anybody who's been to Acapulco in the past, few decades. So
you mentioned surfing, so I want you to tell this story. There was Nicaragua has become the new Costa Rica, right? Where you had the surfers who decided, okay, I've forgotten his name now, but he was thinking about Costa Rica, and they were like, no, it's already overbuilt. Let's go to Nicaragua. And they had a great idea, and looking into it as kind of an eco destination, right? They were very much about, but sometimes politics get in the way.
Yes, Nicaragua was the new Costa Rica until they had their recent kind of political upheavals, and they are starting to recover a bit now. But yeah, it's really one of the preconditions for a successful beach tourism or any tourism industry is a stable political environment. And as soon as that goes away, all of the work and effort that got put into creating a sustainable beach tourism culture in Nicaragua kind of fell by the wayside. Yeah.
Another interesting part of the book that I thought was Rockaway once had more hotels than Cancun does today. Isn't that hard to picture?
Yeah, Rockaway is part of, it's a peninsula in New York City, actually. It's within New York City, but pretty much Long Island. And like Long Branch on the Jersey Shore, it had a streak as the most popular beach resort in the country. Not just hundreds of hotels, but hundreds of major hotels with hundreds of rooms, and yeah,
So what happened?
One of the things that happened was overdevelopment. People of more means eventually started to go further and further out on Long Island, which is where they remain today. But the real decline of Rockaway, especially, really coincided with the rise of air travel, affordable air travel for the middle class. Once the middle class was able to fly down to Florida or down to the Caribbean easily for their vacations, the kind of more regional places tended to suffer a bit, and Rockaway definitely succumbed to that.
Another interesting place you talk about in the beach is in Indonesia. Is it Nihai? Is that how you say it? The Nihai?
Nihi Sumba.
Yeah, tell us a little about that.
Nihi Sumba was a super, super high-end resort that I went to in Indonesia that really is doing some interesting things in terms of, alongside founding this resort, founded a foundation that is dedicated to improving the lives of the community around it. And it's been a really successful kind of template for how high-end resorts can do something like this. Because of the nature of the wealth that comes through there, they've found it really easy to fundraise for the foundation, and they've nearly eradicated malaria. Malaria was a huge problem on that island. They've nearly eradicated it now. They've given clean water to all the villages via wells. They sponsor college scholarships, with the deal being, that they sponsor these college scholarships, and then the people who receive them then come back to the island to work for a certain number of years after they're done with their education. So it's really a template for how you can harness this kind of tourism to benefit a local community.
I'm wondering your thoughts on the future as we go forward. I'm just thinking, we all have these places we visit that we can tell are manufactured. Like I went to Las Vegas and I stayed at the Mirage, which is lovely, and sitting out there by the pool, with the fake waterfall, and it's, I think of Las Vegas as kind of Disney for adults, right? Everything's sort of manufactured. Certainly not what the actual local environment looks like, right? So what do you see as we're going forward, as people are now maybe turning a little more to the ecotourism and thinking more about the actual local experience? What do you see happening?
I mean, I don't think that anytime soon the beach vacation is going to disappear completely. In a more long-term sense, do I think it's possible that generally we will start looking to other places. Yes, I do. Like you have to remember also that we think of now as our love of the ocean, our love of the beach is just kind of like an inherent part of being human, and that's not really the case. Before kind of the 1700s, the ocean was considered a terrifying place that you wanted to stay as far away from as possible, never go to if you could avoid it. And that attitude, gradually shifted, obviously. But I don't think it's a given that forever our collective love of the beach and the beach vacation will hold.
Do you think we're going to be more conscious of the environment as some of these resorts move forward, or is it going to be the same old, same old?
I hope so. I really have come to the conclusion that it's going to take governmental involvement. I don't think that of their own volition, the companies that build beach resorts and profit from beach resorts will take more sustainability measures than they're required to. It's one of the interesting things that I discovered was that there's a thing called a payback period in real estate development, which is the term for how long it takes after a building is completed for it to make its money back for the developer. And in beach tourism, that number is generally 5 to 7 years. So, when you're thinking about a place like Miami Beach that is obviously screwed, it's everybody knows this, and then you're like, well, why would they keep opening new resorts there? And the reason is because if it makes it for 10 years, they make a profit.
They make their money, yeah. How did you choose the locations that you went to for the book? Because you went to all over the world. You could have gone anywhere, and obviously we didn't talk about all of them.
Yeah.
How did you choose?
I was really hoping for a cross-section of different places that were doing different things. Places that were doing things well, places that were doing them terribly, places that were at an early stage in their beach tourism industry, places that were already through the decline stage. So just to kind of see holistically get a picture of the entire industry was the goal.
How about questions from the audience? Yeah. The most beautiful water he's ever seen was in Carthage, in Indonesia, and you wonder, most beautiful water, right? And you wondered if you wrote about that in the book.
I did not, no. If I only could have written about every every location, yeah. But I didn't. I wrote about Baia, which is, it was the kind of ancient Roman elite's seaside resort, which is now underwater in the Bay of Naples in the Mediterranean, which sounds like it could have been kind of similar, just a place of so many pools and spas and all of that. And I kind of always hold that up as like an example of how impermanent this stuff can be, that this was kind of like the place of leisure for the Roman elite, and now it's underwater. It's
like Miami will be.
Yeah. You said it, not me.
Right here in the back.
I don't need it.
No, we need it for the recording. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Sure. You obviously traveled a lot for research, but with the internet now, so much can be done. Investigative reporting with internet. How much % would you say was one or the other? Thank you.
Of how much of my research was done kind of at home and how much was, I guess I would put it at probably 70-30. I think I spent a lot of time at these places trying to understand them, and
70% visiting them, 30% internet.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right down here in the front, and then we'll go behind and next one second, we can bring the mic. Yeah.
I don't have to be loud. A comment and then a question. The comment is we just got back from Indonesia and went to this beautiful resort at this beautiful Bintan island in Indonesia. And the resort was gorgeous, except that they had to have 2 people who did nothing but clean the beach. The trash problem was so bad there. And we were talking about the symbiotic relationship between the local community and the resorts. So that was a bummer, and I'm hoping that, you know, as these developing countries develop a little bit more, that won't be a problem, but the resort was beautiful. The next question is if money was no object, what beach resort would we find you at?
The question I always get. And my answer, I think, will disappoint you, because my answer always is that my goal wasn't really to find my kind of favorite ideal beach resort with this book. My goal was to kind of find the most captivating ones in the context of, you know, the beach tourism industry. But what I always come back to is, in terms of like places that I found fascinating, I think Acapulco is at the top of the list, because the reality of the place on the ground is so different from all of the news reporting about it, and it is still quite beautiful in terms of natural beauty. It's remarkable, and then it's also still a thriving beach resort area, but because Americans don't go there anymore, it's kind of assumed by the media here to be done and over, which when I got there on the ground was not really the case at all. I'm curious, was the resort you went to in Indonesia, was it close to Bali? No, it wasn't. Okay. Oh, okay. Because I know Bali has such an enormous trash problem. Yeah.
Right here. We have a microphone, yeah. Go. I tried to give you a hint. We were going there next.
Oh, well, you mentioned transportation being such a pivotal thing in how it changes. And I've been to several places and cities where the cruise industry has come in and how that affects, I mean, even in small ways, comes to Nantucket and stuff. So how did you touch on that in your book and the, you know, that whole sort of subculture? Because they oftentimes do go to beaches and make big changes, but also are very important. I was in the Caribbean in Grenada, and everything around when the ship came in, you know, they were able to time it such, and it's a pretty small island, and so, you know, to some extent, it benefits them. You know, they know when it's coming, they prepare, they boot up, and it wasn't a bad thing necessarily, but I wondered if you did any research on cruises.
I touch on cruises. You know, I don't go into it too extensively, but from my perspective, from the research I did do, it seems like the cruise industry, especially in the Caribbean, which is where I looked into it the most, is a little bit of a raw deal for the places that cater to it. What tends to happen is, you know, on the cruise ship, they sell whatever activities you want to do on land once you get there, and so maybe they are hiring a local to then like take people on that tour or take them whatever the activity is, but they're paying them a very low rate to do that, and then actually keeping most of the revenue from these things. So there's a term in the industry called leakage, which is the percentage of like tourism revenues that leave a country. And in some countries, it's extremely high, and especially in the Caribbean, it can be over 50% of money tourists spend on their vacations does not stay in the country. And the problem seems to be the worst with both cruises and all-inclusive resorts.
One more question, down here.
You described a machine for taking the tourist beer bottles and making it. Is that just a feel good for the tourists, or could something like that make a difference?
For that island, I think that made a huge difference. And in that particular scenario, actually, so what she's talking about is on Tiamen Island in Malaysia, I came across this sand-making machine that the locals were using, where you could take a beer bottle from, the tourist use, and feed it into the top of this machine, and then sand came out the bottom. And so rather than kind of sand mining their beaches when they needed to make concrete for buildings and stuff, they had this resource for sand. And in that case, it solved two problems on that island, and one was the beer bottles. They didn't know what to do with all of these beer bottles. They just kind of had mountains of beer bottles they didn't know what to do with. At the same time, it's a really common thing in poorer parts of the world to mine beaches for sand when you're mixing concrete. And so both of those things were happening, and this machine just kind of solved both of those problems. And it's on a fairly small scale. It's not, the population of that island is not huge. But in that case also, that was not something that tourists ever saw. That wasn't presented to tourists. It was just a solution that was come up with on the island. And to me, it was an example of solutions that can be executed on a local level like that. And I think that's one of the important things is that solutions can't just be a one-size-fits-all, because every single beach and every single community has different problems. The environment affects it in different ways. Climate change affects it in different ways. And so it really does have to be on a kind of case-by-case basis. But in that particular case, it was a kind of beautiful solution for this island.
Brilliant idea, yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, everyone, for being here.
You guys.